Welcome, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good day. How's everybody doing?
Doing good.
Cool.
Eating lunch.
Hey, Miss, huh?
Hey.
Familiar face.
Yeah, of
What's
course
for
I
lunch?
have to join. Yeah. What?
I was going to do this presentation in my own meetup in a couple of weeks from now, but now you're here. I might have to come up with a different topic.
Oh.
Hey, let's see who all we have here. Charlene, good to see you.
Hey, how are you, Mart?
Good, good. Looking to see some other familiar names. Andrew, good to see you out there. I guess not good to see you. Good to see your name.
Mark, it's been a while.
It has. Hey, Trey.
How you doing?
Good. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Katrin has already started the recording, so thank you, Katrin. Yeah, we want to give Maarten enough time to go through his presentation. So welcome to Scrum Masters of the Universe. So talk a little bit about our mission. We go over this every time, but we'll just go ahead. So our mission, we feel like there's great value in getting out of our silos and connecting with others who are passionate about growth as Agile practitioners. And our goal is to provide a place for Agile enthusiasts to learn, grow, flourish, and apply Scrum in Agile and in the world of work. And my apologies, I hope my microphone isn't picking up my German Shepherd barking. He must see a legion of zombies outside and he is going absolutely crazy. So my apologies for that. Hope you can connect with us. There's a few ways we've kind of pared these down to be a little bit more focused. So if you're here, you found us on our meetup page. We also have a YouTube site where Jamie always puts all of our recordings. So Maarten has graciously allowed us to record this session. It'll be out on YouTube, if not later today, sometime tomorrow. And I believe, Maarten, you said you'll allow us to share your slides as well.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, awesome. Thank you for that. And just want to call to that last item there. We're now on Discord. So if you really want to have a way to connect with other people and be able to have conversations with others within Scrum Masters of the Universe, invite you to go there and look at us on Discord. If you're not familiar with Discord, it's just another, it's a community where we can chat together. So think of Slack, just a different alternative to Slack. I don't think we have very many voice conversations there, but maybe that's something we'll look at in the future. But yeah, join us on Discord. A lot of good discussion there. Here's the leadership team, our leader, Jamie, myself, and Katrin. Katrin Kemmeltz is behind the scenes and operating all the things and helping keep things smooth. So thanks for the links that you're got posting there for us. Katrin, good job. All right, upcoming events. Let's see if I can give me half a second here and I will try to go over to this slide and maybe I have to stop sharing and reshare. All right, and share. All right, not the smoothest, but hopefully everybody sees the Scrum Masters of the Universe meetup page. Do I see some nods? Okay, great. Well, this is the place you want to go to look at our upcoming events. So if you look on our page and look at upcoming events here, we actually have here is today's with Maarten Kossen. Tomorrow we have a reschedule from before. So Ben and Sheena are going to talk to us about how to measure how well a team is doing tomorrow evening. So I hope you're able to join us for that, at least tomorrow evening here in the States. Then on the 31st, we have Evelyn Ross to talk about how to boost using your brain science to boost your Scrum events. That looks pretty interesting. And we already have things coming in June and even out in July as well. So that's a great place to keep track of us and see the upcoming events. All right. All right. Let me go back over here again. I need to practice so I can be better at this. Okay. All right. Hopefully you see on the screen now our sponsors, our wonderful, wonderful sponsors. So you see them there, Agile Alliance, Agile AI, and Scrum.org. Those were three that have been with us pretty much since the onset. We've added two additional ones here, and that's OptiLearn and Scrum Mastered. And so Katrin has put some links to all of our sponsors. We encourage you to please go out and visit them. Just say a plug for OptiLearn and Scrum Mastered. If you're looking for any training or you're looking for just some sessions where you can learn, I would highly suggest Ryan Brooks is with OptiLearn and Daria Bajina is with Scrum Mastered. I met both of them and they're wonderful, wonderful people, and you'd be very happy to talk with them. So just give a little plug about them and the courses that they have. Go out and check them out. All right, the reason everybody's here is to listen to Maarten talk about 7 unmentioned challenges of Scrum. So Maarten, I think you have a slide to go over your own introduction. I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you. So Maarten, welcome, and thank you for speaking with us.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for the great introduction. I hope everybody will forgive me for having to set up my slide share real quick so I can also see the chat and the participant list. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and looking forward to having an awesome meeting with all of you. So yeah, Scrum Masters of the universe here. Let me introduce myself real quickly before we dive into the actual presentation. So my name is Maarten Kossen. I am the Senior Agile Coach at a company called ProAwareness. We're a multinational agile coaching, training, consulting firm. I've been in the business for about 15 years, over 400 people working for us worldwide in the agile space. On top of that, a whole bunch of development teams, lots of coaching experience. I'm also a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org, so one of the sponsors of this meetup. Been doing that for about 6 years now, trained over 1,000 people, product owners, Scrum Masters, really exciting to do it. Got another class coming up next week, so that's very excited. And I started all of this as a software engineer back in 2009 when we were like hit in the face by this thing called the Scrum Guide, like the first thin version, like the lower page count version of the Scrum Guide. And we sort of started figuring that out, and we sort of transformed that whole organization from project-based to like a completely agile organization. And they're still doing it. They used to sell like traditional waterfall projects, and for the past probably 10 years, all they've been doing is selling sprints, and they're sold out all the time. So it does work. And that's sort of like where my experience came from and what drove me to be an agile coach at one point, join ProAwareness and expand the company to the United States. And I'm based out of Houston, Texas, where it's getting hotter and hotter, especially for this time of year. I also did something cool earlier this year. I published the English version of Toolkit for Agile Coaches and Scrum Masters. It's a book that is tailored for Agile Coaches and Scrum Masters, and basically has 99 exercises that you can apply as a Scrum Master or an Agile Coach. And I'll be giving away a free copy of the book to whoever asks the best question at the end of this meetup. So keep your questions coming and queuing. I might save a whole bunch of them for the end, so it's easier to sort of go into it. But I'll definitely be giving away that free book. Domestic shipping only, I have to say, domestic US. Otherwise, I'm going to have to FedEx this to Japan. That's going to be a little bit too expensive. No offense. All right. So with that out of the way, happy May 4th, very special day today. Outline for the meetup. First, going to sort of contextualize why I came up with the 7 unmentioned challenges of Scrum, right? I want to sort of like frame it, and then we'll dive right into those 7 unmentioned challenges all the way up to that Q&A. Just a little disclaimer, when I say these 7 unmentioned challenges of Scrum, I don't mean to say these are the only challenges of Scrum. These are just challenges that I've sort of identified over, well, let's say the past roughly 13 years that I've been working with Scrum, and that I see as like a common denominator across organizations. It might be that there's challenges that you think, yeah, this is a lot bigger challenge, and that's perfectly fine, right? So these are not the 7 ultimate, but these are 7 unmentioned challenges of Scrum. So I do want to get straight to it. The first one, and that's actually implementing Scrum. And I want to take it back to what I said in my introduction, right? So when I first read the Scrum Guide in 2009, I was like, hey, that's simple. I get that. Let's start doing it. And it turned out it really wasn't all that simple, right? As it says in the Scrum Guide, it's simple to understand, yet difficult to master. And doing it right is one of the hardest things to do. However, it is absolutely essential for you to be successful with this, or in some cases for it to even work. And I want to elaborate on that a little bit, because what I see happening, and this is still happening to this day, is that when organizations start adopting Scrum, or teams start adopting Scrum, or are even working with it, what they're doing is they start adapting from the start. And there's an easy counter that people usually give me. Is like, yeah, it's all about adapting Scrum, right? Yeah, sure. But you got to know what to adapt. You got to learn when to adapt, right? So if you take Scrum and sort of like start adapting it from the start and say, well, let's skip retrospectives. Let's do the daily Scrum for like 30 minutes. Well, the product order can do. You're making changes that over the course of time may be perfectly valid, right? Depending on your team's circumstances. I'm not advocating you stop doing retrospective or doing like too long daily scrums. I'm just saying, based on experience that you gain, you might make some changes and find something that really works for you. However, if you never really try Scrum, you will never know how it's supposed to work, and you're going to be adapting the wrong thing. You want to make sure that you do it right first. You want to do it right first. And that really boils down to the why behind Scrum, right? There's a reason why Scrum has their events, their accountabilities, their artifacts, and the commitments that come with that, right? There's a clear reason why we're doing all these things. And I think it takes time for teams to sort of learn why they're doing things and really understand that why. And once you know that, once you've gotten a grasp of that why, it will be easier for you to start making some changes. And once you understand that, it is also easier to identify your own how. So how are we going to be approaching this? So Scrum is not the ultimate solution. It's not a silver bullet, right? You're going to, as many of you will know, you're going to need lots of other practices or frameworks to go with that. And well, the other 6 unmentioned challenges will address part of that as well, is that you're going to need to pull in all kinds of other things in order to be successful. This is just a starting point. And what typically happens as well when people start adapting from the start, they're going to go like online and find some things that, yeah, this is what others have done, and implement those things that works for them, but doesn't necessarily work for you. Right. And that's really one of the trickier parts, because organizations are sort of like trained to pick something, to try something, and then copy paste it across the organization because it seems efficient. I spent, like, currently engaged at an oil company. I spent the previous 2 years at doing a transformation of a 3,000 people large IT organization worldwide. And so we launched a tribe according to like the Spotify model for whatever that may mean, right? And so we did that successfully. But then what they did was sort of copy paste it across the organization. And that didn't work that well, because what we figured out worked for us didn't necessarily work for the others, right? So that's why I'm so strong. Like, if you're implementing Scrum, then you got to start doing it right. And the same goes for some of the other things, right? Start doing it by the book. It might feel tedious a little bit, but at one point, you're going to start learning, and you're going to see like, oh, this is what they intended, but this little bit just doesn't work for us. So let's find a way to sort of fix that or change that or whatever. But you got to learn first, right? So implementing Scrum, one of the biggest challenge, and they're not that vocal about that, but it's a lot harder than it seems. And that's still the case. All right, so I don't see any questions, so I do pause after like every challenge, see if there's any questions in the chat. So feel free to leave any urgent questions in the chat. Otherwise, we'll save them for the Q&A. All right, the next challenge that organizations, people, whatever, are typically facing is the organizational culture, right? So there's a couple of things that you probably know about Scrum. it does create transparency within an organization, right? It shows you things you didn't see before. One of my coworkers actually calls Scrum as sort of like your mother-in-law, right? She comes into your house, she points out everything that's wrong and then leaves again. Like, it's not the solution. That's sort of like what Scrum does, right? It creates a lot of transparency, but it doesn't tell you how to solve all of that, right? And to create that true transparency, you need trust and courage. And the thing with most organizations is that they're usually not ready to face that kind of transparency, right? That level of transparency. Because over years, like, stuff's been built and everything. So that culture of trust, courage, transparency is typically not ingrained into an organization, right? And I want to share a couple of examples about that as well, and not necessarily to trust, courage, and transparency, but to that organizational culture that will need to adapt over time if you want to be successful with this, right? So one of the first ones is project thinking versus product thinking. Lots of people still think of projects, and the thing, project's not a dirty word, right? But a project is an endless thing, right? It's got sort of like, by nature, it's got sort of a fixed scope or a fixed length or whatever, right? And if you approach everything as a project, you're never going to fully grasp that products, especially when you're in the IT space, live on forever until you decide to sort of kill them off, right? You got to keep supporting it. You're going to keep getting questions until you really pull the plug on them. The other thing to this is with project thinking, you're typically measuring things the way that tell you how you are successful. Yes, I successfully completed a project, right? But what does that tell you about the value you've delivered? What does that tell you about your product? What does it tell you about how happy your users are, how many people you're using, how much turnover you're generating? Like, it doesn't tell you anything, right? So this is also internal success measurements versus external success measurements. Like, it's like, yes, we are successful as a team, but that's not how an organization measures success. If you're a for-profit organization, success is measured in dollars or your currency of choice, right? So you're going to have to pivot to that and really focus on your customer and finding measures that work with that. And that's a big cultural shift for lots of organizations, especially if they're set up in a way where you're sort of being trained to think or forced to think in projects, external success, and that sort of ties into your whole career, right? So if you want to make a promotion, there's typically a couple of things you got to do, like successful project this or whatever that. And it sort of ties into that as well, rather than you not being in the spotlight, but focusing on the success of the company. So it's a massive mindset shift, a massive cultural shifts in organizations. And Scrum really requires organizations to make that change, and it's not explicit or implicit about that, but like, you are going to need it. You are going to need that mindset shift, that cultural change in order to be successful. While at the same time realizing that trust builds over time and requires that courage, right? So, and that's typically the challenge people are really facing with that cultural change, is because when you start using Scrum, you're sort of asking people to trust you with this thing and give you a lot more freedom. Yet that trust relationship hasn't been built yet. So both sides are going to have to be very courageous, build that trust relationship over time. And on top of that, it really requires leadership action, right? Little boss baby over there, kind of bossing everybody around. That ain't going to cut it. That's simply not going to work, right? You're going to need leadership commitment. And I'm talking to lots of people in the Agile space, leaders, but also Scrum Masters, coaches, people in teams. And leadership keeps popping up. Like, this is one of the bigger things when we're talking about organizational culture and that mindset shift, that they are going to have to lead there. They're going to have to give the right example, because otherwise the buck stops there and you're never going to be able to be completely successful with this. I don't see any questions. Some excellent points here. Shirley mentioned mindset change. Psychological safety is also imperative to success. Shirley, yeah, absolutely agree. And I guess that's what I also mean with trust, is that people need to be able to speak their minds and not be afraid to get fired. And I guess that also goes to your own career versus success of the company, right? You might do something that's not going to help you, it's going to help the company, but that does require that psychological safety. You'll see a question here. What have you seen has been the driver of the cultural change, as you said, that Scrum does not solve the culture issue? What motivates the leaders? Well, that's actually a question. In my experience, I don't have the answer to yet, because I only know what kind of leader you need. And I know that some people can transform in that kind of leader, but not everybody can. So I'm not sure if there's a motivator, sort of like the kind of person you need. It's a big shift from like the Industrial Revolution, where we've all been working in factories, and it's like the boss tells you what to do and slaps you if you're too slow, something like that. I'm oversimplifying here, right? But you get the point. All the way on to, well, people that need to be more like servant leader. That's a different personality type, right? So I'm not sure if you can motivate every leader to change. I think you can change that, help them change to a degree, but not necessarily make them the leaders that they need to be. So not sure if that helps, but I just want to throw it out there. And another person asked me, should we be looking at Scrum as product management framework instead of project management framework? Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I would, that's a nice way to put it, actually. Yeah. It's a lot about product management. It was also made for products, right? Not for projects. It's never been a project-based approach, always been and now it's, well, they've sort of abstracted it away to frameworks to address complex challenges or something like that. I can't even remember the wording for that one. So cultural change, number 2 of the 7 unmentioned challenges. Right, the releasable increment, another one of these beauties that, and this is a hard one. This is a really hard one. I'm going to admit that straight off the bat. I have the pleasure of working with a manufacturer, like a large manufacturer that builds like machines that print like the microchips and everything. And the releasable increment, the way they sort of put it in the Scrum guide, well, it's a little bit challenging, or they're applying in the Scrum guide. That is really challenging. Right, because or NASA, for example, right? Well, you can only send up a rocket; it has to go right at once, right? But that doesn't mean you can't do a whole lot up to that point. And the thing that I see happening is that most increments simply aren't releasable, and I'm not talking at the 2 organization types I just mentioned. I'm saying almost any organization, and I'm looking at things like testing, like testing doesn't work, UAT, acceptance testing, compliance, packaging, deployment, all these things that typically need to happen after the fact, or need to happen by a different team or department, or even within a team where you sort of develop it first and then it goes into a testing phase, and then you'll just see what happens before you get it back. And even if you test it yourself, they're still going to test the same thing, because there's a lot there that sort of like doesn't gel and doesn't add up. And the picture that, well, the intention behind Scrum when they say increment is that you want to make it push of a button release. It should be the product owner's decision to release, and it's a job of, I'd say, the developers, what used to be called the development team, to enable the product owner to make that decision, right? And in order to do so, they need to make sure that everything they do is immediately releasable. That requires smaller functional bits of work, right? That have lots of automated testing, deployment pipelines, etc. I'll get to that later on. Because only then is release going to be a competitive advantage for product owners. And again, you want to enable the product owner to release that and get that value out there, right? A couple of questions that I always ask, right? So did your customer see it before you release, right? Way too often the answer is no, not really, but I showed it to somebody from the business. Are you using automation pipelines, stuff like that? So how are you making sure that this is releasable? How is that sustainable? So how quickly can you even build it and release it? Like I know of an organization where before they can release their like even a minor change is like a 2 to 3 month process just to get it deployed, because they're doing all those changes into a big bucket and then they start deploying. And well, I probably don't have to tell you that a lot goes wrong in that process. So it's like, it's a 3-month sort of scramble just to get everything working. By the time it's deployed, like the next batch of fixes is already like waiting. It's just not sustainable, right? And it's never been the intention. And the other thing to this, right, to also some of the stuff I talked about before, what is your definition of done as a Scrum team? Because that sort of outlines like what do we think is done or releasable, and how do we enable that? Because the bottom line here is there's no value delivered without a release, right? So you have to be releasing, because you can spend like 9 months building something and doing perfect little bits and increments or whatever, and then release it, but you won't have realized value. And I guess it goes to product owners as well, because they decide release. Like a product owner, sure, a release is a competitive advantage, but if you wait too long, you've got unrealized value, and that's the longer you wait, the riskier it gets, basically. All right, let's see, is there, there's like 2 questions, remarks here. Wouldn't it be part of a demo in a sprint review? For my internal backend teams, the customer is internal, not external. Yeah, sure, that works. And I'd say if you're doing that show it to your customer part, it could be a sprint review, but I'd rather you do it before that time. If you're building something for your customer, I'd rather you work with them so they know what they get. And then at sprint review is more like that holistic overall view, like this is what we got, this is where we are at, this is the feedback that we as a group have, let's look at what is the best thing that we can do next. I used to have like stakeholders sit right next to me, well, not looking over my shoulder, right, but sit right next to me doing their own thing, and I'd be working for them building something, and we could talk every now and then, like, is this what you think you're going to be needing, or is this what you know you're going to be needing? So, and you pull that feedback loop forward to such a degree that release is going to be a no-brainer, given that you do all the other bits and pieces, right? And the conversation sprint review are different. You will realize value a lot quicker. So it's not a bad thing to do in a sprint review. It beats not doing it at all or way too late, right? But the more you can pull it forward, I'd say the better. And the DoD can be part of your team working agreements. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just a tool that Scrum provides. Is there a question, or was it some background noise? That was some background noise. All right. Excellent questions and comments so far. So let's move on to one of my favorite unmentioned challenges. And Steve Ballmer actually got this right. He might not have been the best leader of Microsoft, but for those of you who haven't seen the video, this is a screenshot here from, oh, I think this was about in the late 90s. Steve Ballmer got on the stage like all sweaty, and he kept yelling, developers, developers, developers. One of the most iconic videos of Steve Ballmer. I think one of the better ones that stuck with me. But he understood it, right? If you're doing Scrum, it's all about developers, right? And a different skill set is required if you're going to be doing this from developers. It's not just we're going to change the mechanics here of doing Scrum. It's also the fact that you're changing the way you deliver value, the way people collaborate, basically. And when I say developers, I mean like the discipline of developing value, right? So this includes testers and all of that, all those other kinds of roles as well, right? It's the official accountability from the Scrum Guide. And they sort of like need to learn how to work in a different way. And it turns out that contrary to in the past, and I said this before, people are going to need a lot more freedom to sort of be successful at this. And I'll just throw this one out there. I'm sure you've all heard about it from Daniel Pink's book Drive, and the probably the much more popular video, Autonomy, Mastery, Purpose, right? People want to have a certain kind of autonomy, freedom to, well, not just set their own work schedule, but to figure out solutions on their own, to sort of like set their own day, determine what they want to do. Mastery, you want to get better at what to do. want to be able to improve themselves, learn more, and purpose, like have the idea of making a contribution. And a big part of that also, when you're making this change, is that organization should not just recognize that, but also enable that. Again, this ties into that organizational cultural change. In fact, let them, for example, invest in automations, help teams to learn to become cross-functional, right? That also helps developers. It's even something the team needs, but they might need, right? But also recognize that that skill set needs to be continuously worked, and they continuously need to learn new things because technology changes too. And it's not like, hey, you're a good developer, you have your knowledge and you're set for the rest of the time. No, they need to attend conferences, they need to do research, and organizations need to enable that, because if you're not doing it, ultimately this is going to slow you down, right? The other part that sort of ties into this and to one of the upcoming unmentioned challenges, no titles in a Scrum team, right? So everything drops at the door. I don't care how smart you are or how many titles you have, senior, junior developer, you got a PhD, you're all an equal part of this team. And that's something that's part of that culture as well, that needs to be implemented in organizations for them to be successful, right? And you have to trust the people to do the work you've hired them to do. It sometimes baffles me that developers get micromanaged. I still can't do it. I had a case where we had a couple of folks join the team, and the Scrum Master was sort of asked to really micromanage beyond their case. Like, if you start doing it, you're never going to teach them to be the kind of developer that you need if you start micromanaging and pushing them from the outset. And this is one of the harder things to do, because you could sort of create the picture that you're leaving them hanging for several months, and it could take like a while for them to pick it up. You got to guide them, you got to help them, but not doing it is creating a lot more damage. And again, you're not going to benefit from all of this as much as you would want to. So Mark shared the Steve Ballmer video. I am going to watch it after this meetup just because I can. Charlene is asking, I would love to hear your thoughts on how to measure value. I want to save that one for the end, if that's okay with you. Also, organizations need to include innovation and tech debt within their sprints. Your thoughts on that? So that's another big thing that when I was still a full-time developer, that sort of bugged me. The crap, excuse my English, that I had left behind before and their pressure. And when we pivoted to this way of working, it sort of created the opportunity for us to sort of clean that up. And of course, back in the day when you would have asked me, like, what do you want to do? I said, well, give me 6 months to clean it up. And I know now that's completely unrealistic, right? What we did do with innovation, 10% at a time, it started off like 10 or 20%, but at one point, the organization I worked at became really good at autonomy, mastery, purpose, so they really didn't care. As long as we delivered value, as long as customers were happy, product owner was happy, it sort of like worked in naturally, right? That sort of innovation, we could sort of pick out whatever we wanted to do. But for technical debt, there's actually a great little trick that we did. So in order to sustainably like reduce it, first of all, we stopped making it. That's the big, stop doing it, right? That's going to be a little bit of a productivity hit at the outset, but it's definitely worth it, right? You got to stop creating it. Then what we started doing is whenever we ran into technical debt, we picked up like a Post-it and we wrote it down, like sort of like a quick summary of what the technical debt was. And every time we ran into it again, we sort of put a dot on that Post-it. So it took us like 4 weeks to fill up like 3 flip charts with Post-its. And what we had was a list of technical debt, which is good because now we created transparency about what we were facing. But because of all the dots on there, we knew which of the ones we were facing most. So we started tackling those first. And that sort of allowed us to like, so what is your estimate to do that? To sort of like take that bit out. And so over time, we reduced that. And it took us like 2 to 3 years to sort of get to a place where we were like, yeah, now we have like a manageable amount of technical debt, because you can never completely eradicate technical debt because you make a decision at one point that at some point in the future, it becomes technical debt that you didn't know at the start, right? But it needs to be manageable. So that's what we did for technical debt within sprints. So whenever we had like the estimated like order whatever backlog for technical debt or list, and whenever we would hit a piece of that code, we would sort of try to clean it up and change it. I hope that helps. Another big one, fifth unmentioned challenge here, test automation. That was a big thing for us, and I think for many organizations, also in reducing your technical debt, right? But this is still a very common challenge, unfortunately. And most tests are still manual. There's still people doing tests. There's still people actually spending 2 hours writing a test plan in, well, whatever your tool of choice is, Azure DevOps, whatever. And then every time there's a new release, executing all 37 manual steps, right? And that goes to my second point. Most tests are the wrong kind of tests, because if you have a person testing something as trivial as like, can the start date not be after the end date, then you're really doing it wrong. You're turning it upside down. And if that's your approach to testing, and unfortunately in many situations it still is, you're going to be running out of human resources at one point. You're going to be running out of people to test. I had a team once with 6 Java developers, 2 testers, and of those 8 people, 4 people were manually testing full time, right? And that really, you're never going to be able to quickly deliver value if you're still doing all those manual tests, right? So you got to start automating. And I mentioned a whole bunch of the ingredients for this before, right? One of the bigger ones here, teams need to be able to get a little bit of time and autonomy to sort of set that up. Give them a couple of days to set up that test automation framework or whatever that they need, right? That's worth the investment, because from that point on, they can start doing it. Same as with technical debt. Like the organization I used to work at as a full-time developer, like we did all those things at the same time, right? So we started removing technical debt. We started gradually writing unit tests and stuff like that. And over time, we sort of built it up to a point where it was workable for us, right? So automate as many tests as you can, and provide proof that you've tested it. And this is to the example I mentioned before of the tester going through this 37 steps. The software was tested before it got to the tester. But because there was no sort of proof or record or whatever, they would still go over it because their boss told them to, right? So it was tested manually twice, right? So if you're automating it and you're in a corporate environment, they want to have some sort of record or whatever. And that's totally valid, right? So you got to make sure you automate the test, provide that proof, right? And work with testers and compliance and these people to see what they need. Make sure that while you're automating, you're doing it the right way and you're actually saving other people time, and you're saving time and like that, the overall value stream, as it were. And also ask questions like, are you testing the right thing first? So the smaller logical business logic units, are you unit testing those? And then are you testing the integrations between those units? Those are all things that you can test. Is there cool? That was background. I'm sorry, I got distracted by the audio. And then, yeah, so, and are you investing in testing, right? So this is what I said before, make sure people have a little bit of time to spend on this. Testing is really that first step that you need in order to get the rapid value delivery, because if you can't do this right, you're going to be fixing one thing and you're going to be causing another issue. So it's really like an endless cycle. Another example from my own past, we had like a very simple sort of piece of code that did like sales tax calculations. It's really one of the simplest things on planet Earth, but we hadn't tested it. There was no like automated test for it. And every time somebody changed something to incorporate some sort of exception, it broke something else. And then was like, yeah, let's take 1 day to fix it. All right. So we spent 1 day, then it broke again. So let's take 2 days, let's take 4 days. And you know what really fixed it? As to write automatic tests. You know how long it took? 8 hours. And after that, it took us 4 hours to fix the whole thing. So we spent basically 2 weeks running around in circles. And that sort of like thing that everybody said like, well, yeah, it's expensive to spend time on testing. That would have saved us a lot of time later, right? So this is always worth the investment. Moving on to unmentioned challenge number 6. That's operations, right? Another fantastic pattern I see usually is a team builds it, and then it moves to operations to either deploy it, to run it, to maintain it, whatever, right? Typically not in the same team. And it still baffles me, mostly because of the underlying principle of, if you don't feel responsible for running, maintaining, deploying, whatever, the stuff that you build, how are you ever going to take it as seriously or feel it as much as if you would have that responsibility, right? If you would have to get out of your bed in the middle of the night because something was down in production, you would think twice about what you do. And I spent so much time with developers having these conversations, and there's always some pushback at first, but once you start doing this, your approach to how you build value changes. And that's what this is supposed to be. Like, DevOps is not a new idea. That was implied in the Scrum Guide from the start. And that's supposed to also entail security and whatnot, and the business and whatever you can do. And so the biz, dev, SecOps movement, like, that's been implied from the start. It's just like, now we're sort of figuring out and sort of including all those bits and pieces, right? So if you don't incorporate your operations, your run, maintain into your team, your cost of maintenance is going to be incredibly high. You're going to have very high lead times and cycle times, right? Because whenever you need to wait another team to do it because they have their own plan, right? It's time lost, basically. Again, if you merge it all in the same team, it's going to be a lot easier to communicate. It's going to be a lot easier to do. It's going to be a lot quicker, right? So, that basically. So look at your value stream in your organization. Look at, what is it like from customer request all the way to customer value delivered? What are the steps, right? Can we like merge more of that together into that Scrum team, right? Because that's ultimately what you want to do. And things that I've seen organizations do, one of them, bigger one, they went from on-premise, like their own hosted infrastructure, to cloud infrastructure, and having all kinds of automated tools that enable developers to automatically spin up like all kinds of cloud machines that they needed in services. So they didn't even need a certain kind of operations anymore. That was just automated for them. Massive investment, I can tell you that much. Worth it? Absolutely. Any day of the week. It's going to save a lot of time, right? You have to automate all these things. So yeah, that's operations there. And then on to the last one, the last unmentioned challenge of Scrum, and that is really teams. That is, I guess the whole human resourcing aspect would be, even be a better term for this, right? Teams really tend to change too often. I'm working with a team right now for a year, and I think we had about 12 changes over the last 12 months, right? That team can never become a high-performing team because they constantly get thrown back into forming because something changes again. And sure, the sort of the Tuckman model forming, and sure, the pace at which they get like through those stages change, like it's high because they're a little bit used to this, but they never really get to it because it keeps changing. The same with like people being dedicated to a team for like 50%. Like, it's really ineffective. And I know Scrum doesn't tell you that people need to be on a team 100% of the time, et cetera, but it is simply much more effective that way. But I guess the 50% time is not as much an issue as the fact that teams tend to change way too often, right? I mean, fix teams in order for teams to be successful. And that goes to most of the previous points, right? If you want developers to flourish, if you want to invest in automation and getting operations, you need to have fixed teams that get a chance to learn as a team. Otherwise, it's still going to be about individual, right? So you want to invest in those stable, continuously learning teams. You even want to enable people to pick their own team. Like, where would you flourish? Like, what would be like a good spot for you? There's an exercise in there's an exercise in one of the Scrum classes. It's PSM, and like one of the questions there is like, you're a Scrum Master for an organization. You got about 200 people to divide up in teams. What will you do? And sort of the bottom line there is like, well, let them self-organize. that's really how that works. That's how you create good teams, but that does require some sort of organizational commitment, right? And then for teams, some other things, right? Dropping ties at the door. I mentioned it before. How do growth paths and HR tie into this, right? Are you able to be a successful team member rather than a successful individual? I've had one organization where it was thankfully successful at, like people have like a performance review every year. Sort of pivot that from the individual to 100% individual performance to 50% individual performance. Like the manager would sort of determine that, and then 50% team performance, which the team would judge like how well that team member was doing. And that other 50% from the team was like a 360 we did with the entire team to get feedback. That was really uncharted territory when I first did it, but it made a huge impact because it really became a team, because they were no longer judges individuals. They were all going for the success of the team, and then ultimately for the customer and the organization, right? And again, that ties into performance measurement as well, as I just mentioned. Couple of things in chat here. I agree with your points on the team slide, but my company loves to share people in multiple teams. How do you convince management to keep the same team members on the same team and a dedicated team member? Well, one question I would ask is like, why do people keep shifting teams in case that they're constantly shifting, right? But to the members that are like 50% of the team, like those people have to context switch most of the time, because if you're 50% of one team, it's not going to be Monday morning through Wednesday afternoon that you're going to be in one team, or Wednesday at noon in one team, and then Wednesday at noon to Friday 5 p.m. for example, on the second team. It's going to be conflicting meetings and stuff like that. So it's context switch. It makes people less effective, right? It depends a little bit on the role that they have, right? If they're like a consulting kind of person and they sort of have a certain distance, but if they're a fully participating team member, then I'd say definitely you want to talk to them about how effective these people are, and also involve these people themselves. Like, how happy are they in the fact that they need to be split between the teams? Because most people that I talk to in that position are like, well, rather just stick to the one team, right? Because they're more effective. I hope that helps. If not, please let me know. And what tips do we have for convincing team members to drop their titles at the door and begin to think as one unit, one Scrum team? Well, I've been successful at telling them to do it. But it's a lot deeper than that, right? Because it's not just the fact nobody keeps reminding people to call them senior developer or PhD or whatever, but it's a sort of like behavioral traits that you got to watch as a coach or Scrum Master, where you see that people are behaving. And what has worked in my experience is one-on-one coaching with these people and just straight out addressing it, right? Or anonymously sort of calling out examples if calling it out in the open is not an option for a team, saying, well, I'm noticing this kind of behavior and we're all equal. But it like I said, like it's really fine grained. It's really like the small things. So you notice it planning, like, oh, let me do it, he can do that, and that kind of behavior, right? And that's the sort of thing you want to address. It's like, well, if he doesn't do it, he'll never learn, so we're going to give that to him. It's sort of like really actively jumping in at some point. So I hope that helps a little bit. I'm going to get to that last question at Q&A because we're almost there. I just want to wrap up that last slide here. So 7 unmentioned challenges of Scrum: implementing Scrum itself, changing that organizational culture, getting to the releasable increment, making sure you give developers what they need, you have the right developers, investing heavily in test automation, and I guess automation in general, operations, getting that into the team, automating that, and then finally creating those cross-functional, multidisciplinary, high-performing, self-managing teams is absolutely essential in order to be successful at Scrum. And then one day you'll end up as the fellow on the right there. All right, so I was talking to Mark before, and I know I might have gone through this at a sort of New York City pace of speaking, but we got about 10 minutes left for questions here. So I'm first gonna get to the questions that I see in chat, and again, the best question, I will call out your name at the end, and we'll connect offline, or you can connect with Scrum Master the Universe and get that address somewhere, so I can ship a paperback copy to you. So Anna is asking here, every course or information I have come across in regards to UX design being part of Scrum doesn't really reflect how UX design team can positively impact sprints. All information in a nutshell sums up the UX needs to be present, have open communication, and influence product success. Well, yeah, that's kind of an open door, right? Besides being present in sprints and working ahead, how is UX designer who takes part in Scrum ceremonies, can it contribute to bring value and productively contribute to the team? Or is it all that can be done? I wouldn't say that's all that can be done, right? I'm by no means a Scrum a UX expert, but there is a class called PSU, Professional Scrum with UX. I think that's what it's short for, PSU, Scrum class. And it really addresses this problem. I've been through the class about 2 years ago, and it focuses on the fact that UX is typically not a short iterative kind of thing, right? It takes longer to do it. So it focuses on how can we incorporate that with that sort of fast-paced team that's going on, and what's the role. So it basically provides an answer to your questions. I'm pretty confident. And I hope you're not going to tell me you took the class and it didn't provide that answer, because then it's going to be foot and mouth. But to me, I think that really does address that question. I hope that helps a little bit. Charlene is asking, how do you measure value provided by teams to upper management as a metric? Well, how do you provide value? How do you measure value provided to customers? Because that's the same thing, right? You measure stuff like turnover that you're generating, amount of users, any sort of value measurement that you could attach to that. Basically, analytics, are people using it more often, longer? That really depends on where your product's going. Are users happy? User ratings, feedback, stuff like that. That's how you show to upper management that you're actually delivering value, and that's what it should be all about. That's how organizations start. It's like, I'm building something that people want to buy, because if they don't want to buy it, they won't buy it. You're never going to be successful. And that's the whole reason we're doing Agile, to keep delivering value. So it all boils down to, how do I measure whether I am delivering value to my customer? And again, if you tie that to saying like, hey, this team delivers that to the customer, then you'll know the value that team has delivered. Challenge in organizational culture, doing a transformation. We can make or get leaders in business to support the transformations. And how can we make or get leaders in business to support the transformation? To answer that one first, that's a tricky one. What has worked for me in the past, and that's all I can really share, is you're also there to help them to be successful, right? Because they're the leader of a group, and they probably are more, well, they should be more successful if that group or those teams are more successful, right? And you're ultimately, you got to remind them, we're doing all of this for the customer. You're not doing Scrum or Agile for yourself, for the team. Bigger mistake I made in the past, thinking, going to the first customer trying to sell a sprint, saying, yeah, we're doing all of this because it makes it easier for us, and totally ignoring the fact that it's supposed to make it easier for them. I usually leverage that with leadership to say, like, this is what we need to be successful in order to deliver the value. And I want to enable you to empower that. I want to make sure that you have all the tools that you need in order to deliver even more value, or this is what these teams need of you. Because for leadership, it's sort of a squeeze, right? Yeah, the team's doing something else, and there's like the Scrum guide, lots of practices, and there's like upper management that, yeah, we'll go faster. And then they're sort of in a squeeze because they're still getting measured in a traditional sense, typically. Yet they have these teams doing something that they can't really control in the traditional sense. So it's a super squeeze, and that's typically the avenue that I use to sort of like say, I want to help you get out of that squeeze, but you have to work with me, and you have to enable them. Yet at the same time, we're going to work that way up and sort of change that part of the organization as well. I do hope that helps. Let's see, there's some other questions in there as well. What's the role of PMO in that organization? I want to give a limited response to that because it's a very complex bit in transformation. You want to involve them from the start and at least tell them what you're doing and then work with them to see how they tie into that, because I've also seen them transform to actual agile PMOs to the extent that it worked. I guess I'm not saying PMO is a bad thing, but I'm just saying it's a massive transformation for them as well, right? They are used to command and control, so it's a mindset shift. Yeah. As an agile coach with knowledge of other frameworks, how and when do you determine if Scrum can or should apply to a product development approach? Good question. Typically when it's really product, Scrum works really well if it's a bunch of teams. Otherwise, well, you can do Scrum at scale, like not the framework, but like you can do like bigger things as well. But sometimes you need to come in with something like SAFe, the Scaled Agile framework, because it simply provides a lot more. It's like a bigger toolbox, right? That some organizations need that, some products need that because they're so complex. But other than that, if it's a product team that and you can sort of sustainably have a product backlog, I'd like to start it with Scrum and see where that takes us, and then take those lessons and sort of start adapting, right? If it's like a service-based team, or yeah, let's stick with service team, customer service, or something like that, or really demand kind of driven. I like to start out with sort of a combination of Kanban and Scrum, right? So the good thing that Scrum offers is those feedback loops, right? Those time boxes, right? So you got your sprint cycle, you got your planning, you got your review, you got your retrospective, you got your daily Scrum. But then again, the whole backlog part is sometimes hard for certain teams. I'm also working with a service-based team right now, and they can't really maintain a backlog. It changes from like week to week. So it's more like a Kanban approach. So to me, really right off the bat, very simple initial response would be that service versus product would be my initial determining factor whether to go with Scrum or something else. Another great
Maarten,
question here. Oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
So just a quick time check.
Oh, yeah.
We've got 2 minutes to the hour, so maybe time for one more question.
All right. Yeah, that sounds perfectly fine. And I'm gonna have to pick and choose here. Let's see what questions we have left. Right. So Estrella is asking, as an agile coach, how do you measure that you are doing a good job while doing a transformation? Only by doing agility assessments? No, I wouldn't say that. Again, am I delivering customer value is one of the bigger things. And I think ultimately as an agile coach or a Scrum Master, what you do should lead to more value delivery. If I see some of the teams that I work with, we started out with a cycle time of like 30 days, and we brought that down to 7. And that's not just on me, that's up to like the whole group, but those are things to show that the work that we're doing is ultimately effective. So again, and that's what you're doing it for. And so value ultimately in the end would still be the measurement, because again, that's the ultimate goal. And you can use lots of metrics sort of like that tie into that. How quickly can we deliver value? Is my technical debt going down? Is my team happier? All those kind of things. I'd say those tie into how well you do your work, and get feedback from your team, right? That's another big part of it. So that's what I would do as an agile coach to measure whether I am doing a good job. I know we're hitting up time here. Still gonna give away that free book. I do have some time to stay if we can leave the call open. That's perfectly fine. Red or blue pill. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna get to that one. I can't remember which is which, right? So Estrella, I want to give you the book because I actually like your last question the best. That's part of the reason why I picked it. It's a super challenging question, and I've given my best I can do answer, and I no means of pretending that it's the answer. But if you can hit me up or Scrum Master of the Universe and get me that address, we can get that book over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Maarten.
Thanks, Mark. It was a pleasure being here, and thanks everybody else for attending. Like I said, I can stay on for a little bit if you want to
Okay.
leave the call open after recording
Yeah.
stopped to answer some additional questions people might have, and otherwise have a wonderful rest of your days, everyone.
I'll do that. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to drop off for another meeting. I wish I could stay. If I end up canceling if the meeting stops, it's nothing personal, Maarten. I just don't know how to work Zoom. So,
Gotcha. That's perfectly fine. I think we should
all
be
right.
okay.